Hey guys, Omar here, broker and CEO of Alden Mortgage and Ome Realty. So, do you think there's a housing bubble? Because if you do, you're an asshole. But do you think there's no housing bubble? Because you're pretty much equally as much of an asshole. So to kind of understand if there is going to be, you're going to have to kind of figure this one out on your own. But what we can do is have the information in front of us, kind of see exactly, has this ever happened before? And the things that we have to look at is the arguments, right? We have the argument of supply and demand, the argument of inflation, the argument of stimulus, and then we have the argument of interest rate. So the first argument, right, is going to be, how did all of this stimulus affect the economy? Now, right now, we are hemorrhaging a ton of money back into the economy. It's crazy how much money that is going back to the economy. Now, this money has to come back some way, somehow. Now, to give you a little idea, this falls hand in hand with inflation. A little history lesson is back in the 70s during the Vietnam War, there was something that happened. We were dumping so much money into the Vietnam War, gas prices were soaring, price per barrel was just nuts, and interest rates took a little bit of a spike, and by a little bit I mean 20%. That was insane, but they were trying to curb what they potentially thought was going to be a really crazy time for inflation. So they had to kind of curve that line of inflation. Now, has inflation played a part? No, because unemployment dropped. So when unemployment drops, you figure that inflation would kind of start rising, right? Because the better the economy is doing, the more that we could start charging for goods. But inflation has just kind of lowered, like we're not doing really too hot. Now, you're probably like, why do you think that inflation has a part to do it? Well, because all of it leads to the source, right? The source is the Federal Reserve. Now, when inflation goes down, that means that the Federal Reserve does not have that much power. Now, currently, the Federal Reserve is at near zero. So their power right now, as far as anything goes, is really low. Typically, what you see is in the Federal Reserve is about 2%. 2% is typically where it's at. So if we hit 2 points back to where we're at right now, so you're looking at about a 2.5 to 3% on interest rates currently for mortgages on a 30-year. It could be anywhere from, let's say, 4 to 4.5. Now, all of this is always going to go back to inflation and trying to make sure that we curb it. So the whole economy is going to rely heavily on what the feds decide, if they're in really bad shape or in their really good shape. Now, what they relied previously really heavy on was something called the Phillips curve. The Phillips curve was a correlation between rates and interest and unemployment. So to go back on it, let's say in the 70s, when we started hemorrhaging this much money back into the economy, there was this guy, his name was Richard Volcker, which was the head of the Federal Reserve. Now, he decided, you know what, we need to curb inflation, so he kicked up interest rates up to like 20%. Now, 20%, it did help the curve out. But at what cost? Borrowing money became very difficult. Lending money became very difficult. So do we get to a point where that ends up happening? Now, a lot of you watching this probably don't know about it, but that was known as what's called the Volcker shock. The Volcker shock was one of those things where we had to go to extreme measures to curve that inflation curve, to make sure that it doesn't just go completely out of whack. Now, sticking to a little bit of a history lesson, then we went into 2008. Okay, that was back in the 70s. Then in 2008, we had a really big hit, right? Everybody remembers that the mortgage crisis that happened, and that really didn't do too much. That was weird. The Federal Reserve was still very confident in everything. So will it happen like it did back in the 70s, or will it happen again like it did in 2008? Now, the rest of it is going to be, let's say, the supply and demand chain. Well, supply and demand, we had way more supply before the pandemic hit. Our supply was above by 3 million listings. Now, because the uncertainty of where everything was at, and how everybody became so scared of what do I do? How do I move during this whole entire situation that we're in right now? They took their homes off, but like back in 2000 and the early to mid 2000s, new home developments were all just skyrocketing, right? They were all being sold at record pace. That's why right now, if you look at the amount of homes that are being purchased right now, they're more than the year before. That's because majority of people took their homes off of the MLS, and which created this whole supply and demand thing. Now, is the supply and demand going to stay just the way that it is? Well, of course it's not. Now, if the feds end up putting 2 points back on, right, to be relative and everything, if the feds end up putting 2 points back, that will put interest rates at about 4 to 4.5%. That means that if you wanted to buy a $500,000 house, that house with those 2 points on, to have your same principal and interest payment as we do currently, would have to come down to like between $390,000 to $400,000. So you would have to take a $100,000 hit, roughly about 20 to 23% of a hit. Now, if you think that it's not, then yeah, go ahead and buy it. Hell, I don't think that it's really going to take that big of a hit. I mean, me personally, I bought a house this year. I took advantage of these low interest rates. So another effect, if the supply is going to increase, is going to be this deferment and forbearance. Now, this eviction moratorium that's happening, the forbearance, the deferment. Now, forbearance, you know, I don't know how many people right now are just not understanding forbearance. They're sitting here in forbearance. Now, forbearance is where you don't pay your mortgage payment. You call your lender and you say, you know what, I can't pay my mortgage, and then you take 4, 5, 6, 7 months, whatever, however long it takes. But then when that 4, 5, 6 months, the months that you didn't pay, they're going to ask for it all back. Now, this creates a little bit of an issue. There are programs right now to kind of help you out. Where are we at? We're at about 5.5% of all homes that are still in forbearance. Now, those are homes that are eventually going to have to pay those mortgages back. Now, the 5.5% was as of the end of December 2020. We'll get an updated list. I'll get you guys updated numbers whenever I find them. But that's going to have a really, really big effect. That could maybe stir up some people trying to get out of their homes, maybe some short sales, maybe some foreclosures. Then if the feds hit us with 2 points, that means buying power comes down. So to sum it all up, could there be something? Well, right now, currently, we're popped up on what the feds are doing, right? The housing market, as we know it, is propped up on the near 0% that the feds put, that makes buying power, which is your mortgage, which is the low interest rates, so appealing. So is there a housing bubble? I don't know. Is there not a housing bubble? I'm not that much of an asshole to say either one of them. You could be the judge of it, and we'll try to figure this out and play it by ear as it goes along. Till next video, guys.